it takes a conservative military to defend America. That's not a Republican argument. That's an acknowledgement that if we are going to defend the Constitution, it means we are actively trying to preserve and conserve it, which means we have to love it.
Welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon, where the best ideas win. I'm your host, Josh Herring. This is a show all about ideas, about how we can rebuild a collapsing culture. My guests all have the credentials, the wisdom, the experience to say something meaningful, to contribute to the rebuilding of our moment. I'm your host, Josh Herring. Today, my guest is Dr. Chase Spears. Chase was in the U.S. Army. He's now retired. He served in the Army for 20 years in military public affairs. Among other pursuits, he enjoys writing about a wide range of topics, including civil and military relations, communication ethics, and policy. Chase holds a PhD in leadership communication from Kansas State University. He can be found on X as @Dr. Chase Spears. Chase, welcome back to the Optimistic Curmudgeon.
Josh, I'm just always honored to hang out with you, buddy. It's great to be with you today.
I'm so glad you were game to do this. I know we got together, I think, about a year ago, and I had some weird things happen with scheduling, and it kind of threw off when I was posting episodes. So I was looking at our conversation a year ago, and I was just struck by how dated it felt. I was like, no, we should re-record now in 2026, because a year ago we were both kind of like, what's going on with Pete Hegseth? And I want to talk about him again today, but we know a bit more about him a year later, and we were both like, Trump. And boy, Trump has changed a lot from 2024 to 2026. So we should really update that conversation. So I'm so glad you were game for kind of getting back together.
Yeah, man, this was fun. I remember thinking that, if our episode didn't run soon, we were probably going to need to redo it or cancel it altogether, because just there'd been so much water under the bridge. We're under such a different context now, and a whole lot of new things to discuss. So yeah, this will be fun.
Well, and I know since we last got together, you've gotten far more into the podcasting space. I'm sure you found this. I find that there are some episodes that are just evergreen. Run those whenever. There are others that they feel a bit more like the news cycle. If you don't get it up within 3 days, it's just not worth posting. But tell us about your show, Finding Your Spine. What's going on with that show?
Man, that is just one of the most fun things I get to do these days. It's called the Finding Your Spine podcast, and I'm really, really blessed to be able to do it in partnership with the Herzog Foundation, which is actually an organization that exists to help promote and just really explode Christian K through 12 education across the nation. And so what in the world is Chase Spears, retired military officer, doing in cahoots with them? Because K through 12 education is not necessarily my specialty, although as a homeschooling father, it is very much a passion. It is very much a calling. But about a year ago, well, let me back up. They started a whole podcast network, and most of it was focused initially on encouraging Christians to get their kids out of the government schools, something I wholeheartedly endorse, and about helping parents to make the leap into Christian K through 12 education, whether that be a brick and mortar school or whether that be actually homeschooling. And then over time, they started growing it. And so about a year ago, they put out a call for auditions, asking for new ideas to come out and share with them, because they wanted to grow the podcast network. And I actually already had a concept, because numerous people have been telling me, you need to podcast. I'm like, I don't want a podcast. I like to write. And enough people finally kept saying it. I was like, fine, I'll come up with a concept and I'll look at it, and I'll see about how to start doing this at some point in time. And it just so happened, that's when the Herzog Foundation said, hey, we want some fresh ideas. So I went out and pitched it to them, and they were totally supportive from day one. And it's called Finding Your Spine because that's what it's about. And I got so tired, Josh, my last couple of years in the Army. I was writing, I was advocating for basic constitutionality in the force. I was advocating for just basic truth. I was not an activist. I still don't really think of myself as an activist, but I do believe that the oath means something. I do believe that when you take that oath, you should actually strive to live up to it in every aspect of your life. And those were the arguments I was making, whether it be in a conversations with leaders, whether it be in conversations with peers, whether it be in the things that I was writing and getting published. And I would find so many people would come to me and say things like, "Hey, Chase, we agree with you, but we can't be seen agreeing with you out loud." So, it was just endless conversations like that. And it went from initial sympathy because I know what it's like to have the mobs come for you. Like I've got death threats. I've had the ratios. I've had the chain of command pulling me in, giving me the smack on the head talk. And so it started off from a place of sympathy. And then over time it got to, y'all just need to man up and spine up. Like you took the same oath that I took. And do you not see the place that we're in? Do you not see what time of day it is? And so that was the whole idea behind the concept. And that's why we call it Finding Your Spine, because that's literally what it's about. And I bring on people who have found their spines, people who've walked through the fire, people who stood when it wasn't the popular thing to do, but they did it because they knew, this is what I have to do to maintain my integrity. This is what I have to do to maintain my ability to look myself in the mirror. And so we have a wide variety of guests on. We have a lot of military veterans. We have a lot of school teachers. We've had Dr. Ben Carson on. That was a lot of fun. And we had these conversations about what it was that got them through their trial, why they did it, and what others can learn from them. And so it's just a real privilege. Finding Your Spine is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.
Well, and we'll be sure to put a link to that in the show description when we publish this on the on my channels. Hopefully, we'll send some folks your way. I love what you're describing because I think it's so important. We live in such a strange time. There are things that should not be coded as right-wing issues. That today, it seems to me, anyone who thinks of himself as in the center, and definitely everyone on the left, thinks about things like the Constitution as being right-wing. And if you actually want to limit the government to its constitutional responsibilities, well, that clearly flags you as a right-wing person. And of course, the mainstream media likes to always attach right-wing extremist. They want to brand anybody who is kind of calling for a smaller traditional role of governance, or, as you pointed out, upholding the literal oath of office, which, if I understand it correctly, is an oath to defend and protect the United States Constitution. So that really ties our military to this particular responsibility. And that should not be a partisan thing. But I think today, to actually take that seriously often gets coded in a partisan way. And it certainly seems to require courage for men to uphold those responsibilities.
It's a shame that that's where we're at, Josh. I mean, that's what I found in doing my writing. My first kind of real, like, no joke, face into the window moment was in 2018 when I published a piece at the Modern War Institute. And I was just making an argument from a conservative worldview. I was not advocating for Republicans. I was certainly not advocating for Democrats. I was not advocating for any particular candidate. I was advocating for constitutional ideas. And I found people were just lambasting it as, "Oh, here's MAGA." Like, no, this is the oath that we swore to. These are principles. And the guest that's running this week is a guy named Sam Shoemate. He's also a retired Army officer, and he was absolutely a whistleblower and just did some work that I just so admired. A lot of his work actually helped to inform some of my research work about the military politicization. And he was sharing with me that he's heard stories about commanders saying that, hey, if you're a soldier who talks about the Constitution, that's a dog whistle for racism. That's a dog whistle for extremism. And that's what the whole Lloyd Austin extremist push was about when Biden took office. It wasn't about truly looking for instances of skinheads in the ranks. Like, we already policed that up. It was looking for people who will stand. That's what the whole COVID mandate was about. It wasn't about protecting the healthcare of the force. It was about finding people who would stand up for constitutional ideals, who would stand up for rule of law, who would ask their leadership, what is the difference between a lawful and an unlawful order? And we've heard a lot about that lately.
Yes, we have.
And weeding them out. And so we shouldn't be at this point in time where, because I say something like, hey, the military should, I wrote a piece recently, the military, it takes a conservative military to defend America. Like that's not a Republican argument.
Right.
That's an acknowledgement that if we are going to defend the Constitution, it means we are actively trying to preserve and conserve it, which means we have to love it.
Well, let's go to that article because that's the one that you sent me as your most recent piece for that we should talk about. And I really enjoyed that particular piece. And I want to parse. I want to start with definitions if we could, because I think when most people, and by most people I mean normal folks who have not read Russell Kirk or Richard Weaver or William F. Buckley, most people, I think they assume that conservative really does mean the Republican Party. And I at least want to protest that assumption because I was talking with some students this past week about the importance of the family and as the primal institution of civilization. And if we mess up the family, it has all these downstream effects for the rest of society. Well, and part of the tricky part there is that the Republican Party is not quite as far gone as the Democratic Party, but they're not nearly as strong on the family as they once were. There is now a notable contingent of log cabin Republicans who embrace the idea of homosexuality either being just next door to marriage or being called marriage. Now, that 50 years ago, that would have been anathema in the Republican Party, but today it's part of the political equation. So when we're thinking about this conservative military, before we get to what does it mean to have a conservative military, walk us through your thoughts on this word conservative. What do you mean by conservative?
I mean it very much in the same way that you're getting at, Josh, is what is the nation? What are the founding ideals of the nation? What are the ideas that drove the structures that our founding fathers put in place as for the United States of America, the republic in which we live? And, the Constitution is not a divinely ordained document, but for being a man-made document, it's one of the finest that you're going to find. These men were brilliant and they did a phenomenal job. And the ideals of the nation are captured in it, the ideals which are very reverential to God. These men, though not every single one of them were worshipers of the triune God, they all certainly had a reverence for the divine. They all certainly had a reverence for the role that Christianity played in Western culture, and they wanted that to be respected here. And that's why we are at least we're founded as a free republic, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And you don't find that in secular republics. You don't find that in other governmental systems driven by other religions. I mean, it's night and day between the Christian worldview mindset and Islam when you see how it reflects in government. And so when I say conservative, I mean just that, to conserve, to preserve. We have a republic. We want to preserve it. We have a way of life. We want to preserve it. We have a fundamental culture, language, worldview assumptions that bring us together. That's what it requires for people to come together as a tribe, a state, a nation. These are the bonding elements that hold people together in those societal structures at small and large scale. And so what do we want to do for that? Well, we want to conserve it. We want to preserve it. The motto of the U.S. Army is "This we'll defend." 3 words, very simple. And you have to ask yourself the question, what is this? And I argue this is the American heritage that we, those of us who read the founding fathers and go to the conservative thought conferences. Note, I did not say Republican thought conferences, right? But those of us who love the Constitution, like, that's what we should be seeking to preserve and to conserve. And so when I think about the military oath, the oath is to the Constitution. Well, you can't swear an oath to the Constitution and truly believe in it and truly ally yourself with it and simultaneously embrace the Frankfurt School ideologies and their neo-variants of our time. You can't love America and embrace the 1619 Project. You can't say we are an exceptional nation worth me potentially dying for, and we're the worst nation that's ever existed and don't deserve to live and need to be dismantled and deconstructed, which is the literal words that we see in just about every scholarly article at most publications today. I mean, this is not I'm not talking about fringe arguments. I'm talking about things that are mainstream. And so you can't, as a military officer, have both. Like you will either love the republic and seek to conserve it, or you're just another mercenary in uniform working against it. And Josh, I saw my last few years, we have a lot of those in.
I think it's so interesting that you bring up that idea of mercenary, because it goes against the ideal, I think, of those who actually are serving the republic through a time in service. I mean, we refer to this as military service. There's a reason we do have a custom of thanking servicemen for their service, and because we recognize that at the very least, the majority of folks who are in active duty military service are making less money in that time period than they would if they were in the private market doing something similar, of a similar nature. But also, I think it's not just monetary. It's also because in even reflexively in our language, we recognize the military exists to serve the good of the nation, and that it does play that role. And we recognize that even in the language. You're reminding me of John Adams. One of his letters, he wrote that we are a moral and religious people. And I went digging for that quote earlier this semester because I wanted to see what the context was. That line that gets trotted out pretty frequently amongst current political commentators, but it's actually in the broader context of him explaining in this letter why exactly the new government they've designed is relatively limited, particularly in comparison to the apparatus of King George III's government and the kind of government structure that you would get in an 18th century European monarchy. They were not, his comparison is, there are those people over in Europe who live under some sort of extreme form of governmental rule where the government can always reach in and control them. Meanwhile, over here in these new United States, we've built a government that is for a religious and moral people that doesn't actually have the apparatus to truly control the majority of people's behavior. And I think that's a dynamic that's present throughout most of American history, where there are always people who will violate the norms of civilization, but by and large, in American history, most of the people in America follow American rule of law most of the time. And because of that, we're able to have a minimal approach to policing people and to controlling human behavior. But it's when, though, and we can do that because we are, again, to quote Adams, a moral and religious people, which I think poses a problem for us today because we are less religious than we've ever been. We're also less moral than we've ever been. And to take this back to something you said at the very beginning, we actually have a lot of educational problems going on. I'm so excited to hear about your partnership with Herzog, because I think I'm more in the classical education space, but the Christian education space writ large is growing, in part because there's good education happening there and parents are looking for it. But there's a greater need today for everyone to be well educated and caring for their own children. I was thinking of your line of being a homeschool father. You have a much greater vested interest in the education of your own children. It means you have to be an educated citizen and help your kids come into this tradition that you're conserving and transmitting to them.
Well, and you're getting right there. What is the point of education? I always grew up hearing, you've heard it, I've heard it, reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's.
3 R's. That's what my grandparents would always say.
That's it. And one of the lines that we've heard a lot since 2020, and that was really a wake-up call. Now, guys like you and I knew that public school has been rotten for years just because we're paying the slightest amount of attention, which is way more than most Americans gave it, right? And then 2020 happened, and suddenly kids are at home and they're doing so-called distance education, and their parents are beginning to see what this so-called education really is about. And they came to realize, well, a lot of this stuff is very bad. And so I even hear among conservative policymakers saying, we need to get indoctrination out of the school and we just need to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I say yes and no, right? Yes and no. Yes, we need to get the left-wing progressive hate America, hate God dogmas out of the public school system. But no, education is not just 3 R's. Education, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and you can say this way better than I can because this is your bread and butter, what you live every day. but education is the transmission of worldview from one generation to the next. And through that, you do hit the basics. The basics are inevitable, but the basics are there to enable the perpetuation of the worldview, of the cultural values, of the religious heritage from one generation to the next. And so we don't understand that. I hear so often policymakers and even school board officials and parents talk about, hey, we just need to get education good so our kids can be ready for the workforce. It's not a jobs training program. If a truly educated young adult is going to be just fine in the job realm, that's the byproduct of a good education. The purpose of education is not to get us there. And of course, that goes back to like the whole last century and Rockefeller's influence and Dewey and all that stuff, which is, you have far greater expertise than I do. But Christian parents need to understand, yes, we do want to indoctrinate our children. And I do indoctrinate my children. I catechize my children. I teach them as the Bible instructs in the fear and admonition of the Lord. I teach them in the ways of American heritage, the way that my mother taught me as a child who was homeschooled. These are things that are important and central to education. And it's deliberately and for nefarious purposes that most public schools, probably every public school now, and a sizable portion of even private schools who would call themselves Christian, have got away from that, because history has shown if you can detach a generation from everything historical so that they don't know who they are, all they have is this moment, they're so much more easy to manipulate and control. And I believe that is a very deliberate move.
Well, Chase, you're bringing up so many interesting things. I want to hit three of those and then toss it back your way. But on that, to your last point about transmitting that identity, it reminds me, or what happens when we don't have that identity. It reminds me of a lecture I heard in seminary about the Old Testament book of Exodus, where the professor was looking at Moses as the author of Exodus. And the argument he made was that Moses was faced with a task. And when we understand the task, we understand the Pentateuch's role a lot more sufficiently, where his goal, he's got something between 1 and 2 million former slaves with him in the desert. They're mostly ethnically homogenous, but there's some people who also left with them out of Egypt. All of them are former slaves. They've all forgotten their history, their heritage, and the God who has saved them. So the first task Moses has is really to teach them who they are. So he writes the book of Genesis, and then he writes the book of Exodus. And by the time he's in his old age, he's also adding Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy as those years and events have happened. But particularly Genesis, I think, is best read as a story of who is this God, what is our history, and why are we going to the promised land? That was really Moses' first task before they could be a singular people. I think that's where a lot of students are today. Students, and in some cases even their teachers, really need to recover a sense of, well, who am I? What was I made for? Where am I in the story, and how am I linked to the past and transmitting that to the present? There's a lot of broader pieces of modernity that work to cut us off from that tradition. And it takes an active move in a lot of difficult directions sometimes to recover that. Second thing on that word indoctrination, I had a boss one summer when I was working for a pool cleaning company who I disagreed with him so much on the way he used the word indoctrination. But you're reminding me of him. His name was Andy. Andy would get a new customer, and he would schedule an indoctrination with this new customer. And I heard this, was like, Andy, what are you doing? Are you like brainwashing them? It's like a Nazi regime. What's going on? He's like, no. See, when you get a new pool, you just think it somehow magically takes care of itself. You don't know what all it takes to keep a pool clean. It takes a lot. You gotta understand your chemicals. You gotta understand your cleaning regimen. You gotta understand what you can do as a homeowner and what you need to call somebody to do. So Andy would teach everybody what they needed to do in order to keep their pool looking blue and not be a stinking cesspool of mosquitoes. And he would call that his indoctrination. He would indoctrinate his new customers into keep being able to maintain their property really well. And that was the first time I'd ever heard a positive use of the word indoctrination. And it's stuck with me as like there is a sense in which what we're doing and teaching is trying to indoctrinate children into the beliefs and the habits that will lead to flourishing. Now, what keeps this from being Nazi-style brainwashing is that we're right. If we're wrong about that indoctrination, then we're actually just doing exactly what the leftists do. And that we're actually, but if we're right, then to not teach children that it is good to honor their parents would actually be a horrible disservice to them. Let me stop there. Any other thoughts you have there? I want to move to a couple questions about colleges real quick in a moment, because that also ties what you said, but I want to pause there. What do you look like you've got some other thoughts?
Yeah, I do. You're hitting on a whole lot of stuff. It all comes down to everything is a tool, right? For good or for bad. I can use this microphone to have a good conversation with you, or I can, unbolt it from my desk here and use the stand to whack someone over the neck, right? I can use my minivan to transport my family safely somewhere, or I can try to pull a Renee Good, which I would never do, right? And so everything is a tool. And it comes down to, are you using it for a morally righteous purpose? We have to get rid of this idea that there's some secular neutrality. And people try to say, okay, well, indoctrination is bad. Well, not if it's done for righteous reasons, right? That's New Testament, right? This is Paul's writings. And it was taught even before that, the Old Testament. Teach the people in these ways to acknowledge your God and to know who they are and to worship Jehovah. Right. This was proper indoctrination. It's just like the word discriminate. We have this almost kind of repulsive feeling towards the word discriminate, because we say discrimination is bad, but every one of us discriminate every single day. I choose not to walk down dark alleys, in big cities. I choose not to drive my car down a boat ramp, right? I choose to eat this food that's a little bit healthier than that food, which is not. I'm making discriminating choices. I choose to see this movie and not to see that movie, to watch this podcast, not to watch that podcast. Why? I'm discriminating. I'm making a choice about what I believe is best. And so, this is where we get into words, where we have to realize that not everything is automatically bad. It's how are you using it?
Well, I think there's a line I've wanted to explore in Edmund Burke's Reflections for years that you're reminding me of. He talks about the positive good of prejudices. And that too is a word that I think, like discriminate, that we often hear used as if, well, we should not be prejudiced. Prejudices are bad. But for Burke, prejudices they're the prejudgments that need to be held in check. And you don't need to just accept all your prejudgments when you're confronted with different facts on the ground. But your prejudgments your prejudices are what allow you to move in a complicated world where you don't always get all information ahead of time. Sometimes you just have to kind of make a decision. And your prejudices, in Burke's mind, actually are a wise thing. They're part of being a thoughtful human being in a complicated world. Though I think next time we do this, I think I'm just going to not even prep show notes, because I've noticed this before. If I have other podcast hosts on my show, we can just go back and forth. We don't need the same structure I usually write.
Well, and I'm thinking right now, was it C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton that said an open mind is like an open mouth? It's good to open things for a certain amount of time, but at some point you have to close. At some point you have to take a bite.
I think that one might be Chesterton, because Lewis has a version of that in Abolition of Man, but it's something along the lines of, one should be open-minded about limited things, but if one is open-minded about unlimited things, his brain falls out.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, this exposes the whole lie of, diversity is a strength, right? We've got away from being a people that have certain things that orient us together, and we're just absolutely fractured, and we're going every which way. And how do you sustain any commonality when you're at war with each other? I mean, this goes back to how the Civil War started.
Well, I'm going to avoid that delightful tangent where we could just go and talk Civil War theory for the next hour. But instead, I want to get your thoughts on a couple different college announcements I've seen this week. One of those came out yesterday. The governor of Oklahoma announced that very proudly that they are seeking to develop a 90 credit hour Bachelor of Arts degree that will get people through college faster and have fewer requirements. And so I'm curious, and really it's done as with the idea that we really shouldn't have so many requirements, and we need kids to get out of debt, and we need them to get into the workforce as fast as possible. That's one announcement. The other one involved Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, has announced that there is no longer going to be any connection between the U.S. military and people studying at Harvard. Now, I will say I discovered today that I have a family member who's in the Army he understood this decision. He was personally disappointed because he had his eye on a particular program, a residency program at Harvard he wanted to take advantage of. So I was curious about your thoughts on both of those. What do you make of those moves in terms of colleges?
So the Oklahoma one, this is the first I've heard about it, and I would want to look into it a little bit more before I came out and said whether it's a net good or bad. And I'd love to hear your thoughts because you've obviously read it. It comes down to where the college is doing. And you said it's a Bachelor of Arts. So let me ask you this real quick. This will help me. Is it is it more of like a general Bachelor of Arts, like a traditional liberal arts education, or is there still a specialty to it?
I didn't look too deeply into it, so that's already getting past what I can say definitively. What I did read was really celebrating the move from the generally recognized standard of a bachelor's degree being 120 credit hours to then having a 90 credit hour full bachelor's degree option.
Yeah, I would want to look into that a little bit more, but I will tell you, I think a lot of higher education, particularly at the baccalaureate level, has gotten away from helping to provide people a basic liberal arts education and more into accelerated job training. And a lot of graduate programs are that way as well. And I understand we're in this weird piece of history where that's a thing. I don't think it's really benefited us. I mean, kind of look to the right and look to the left. Are we really better off culturally than we were before all this specialization? And I'm not against specializations by any means. We need them. But I mean, the purpose of a liberal arts education should be so everyone has a similar baseline of, all right, here's your history and here's who we are and here's where we come from. And you should touch music theory and you should touch philosophy and this and that and this and that. And so much of initial undergraduate education has got away from that because, well, everyone wants this degree because that degree is supposed to provide me that credential in order to get that particular job. And of course, the stats show that only a small percentage of people actually end up working within those fields. I ended up in the Army doing public affairs work because I graduated with a journalism degree into an economy in which, schools were pumping out way, way, way more of us J qualified people than there were jobs in the industry. And
I hear what the Washington Post is hiring now that they fired a third of their workforce. So maybe they want to give you $1 million to be a gender theorist reporter for them now.
Well, they could give me $1 million. I'd be okay with that. They would not get out of me what they would want for it.
That's right.
So anyways, and on to Harvard. So this is something that I have some certain definitive thought on. And for your listeners who may be less familiar with these military fellowships, what Pete Hegseth was getting at is just about every school in the nation, not every single one, but pretty close to every one of them, have some sort of relationship with the military, whether it be through an ROTC program and then the higher level schools, Harvard and a couple of the other Ivy Leagues. They also have programs where War College fellows will come and spend a year. And so when you're a senior lieutenant colonel and you've been selected for promotion to full colonel, one of the checks that you have to do for education, for primary military education, is you have to attend the War College. And there are several different ways you can do that. You can literally attend your service's War College. There are also several joint war colleges you can attend, like there's the Eisenhower School in DC. Here on Fort Leavenworth, just a few miles up the road from where I live, There is another variant of the War College. A lot of the senior lieutenant colonels will choose to do it there rather than go to DC or go to Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania. Then you can also compete to go to an outside university. So Harvard is one of the very well-known places that have a one-year residency for Army War College fellows. And I remember this well because back before I decided to leave the Army at 20 years, I was eyeballing that program. I knew a guy who'd gone to that program. I thought, I love academics. I know Harvard is not the kind of place Chase Spears will be embraced, but it will still be a sharpening experience, and I will still learn some neat things, and it won't hurt to be able to say I did a Harvard residency. Mm-hmm. Now, this was before Harvard went even crazier off the rails. This was a few years back. I was looking at it. So I'm familiar with that program. And what Pete Hegseth said is, hey, we're going to stop sending our War College fellows there, because at this point in time, Harvard no longer represents the values that the Department of War represents. And that's a good move. You have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of primary military education? We call it PME. So when you're an officer, you have your initial commissioning schools, you have your tech schools. For me, it was OBC, Officer Basic Course, and then there was a leadership course at Fort Sill after that. When I became a major, they sent me to the Commanding General Staff College here at Fort Leavenworth. That's why I ended up here. And then you become a colonel, you go to the War College, and then you become a general. There's a General Officer Charm School you go to. And so these are boxes you're checking along the way. And you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of these educational pursuits? Well, they're supposed to make you a better staff officer. They're supposed to make you a better commander. And for example, when I went to Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, that was an active argument. What is this school supposed to be? And my reply is, well, it should be what it was founded to be, a place that creates good staff officers for divisions and corps. And I ended up, while you're there, you can do additional coursework and get a master's degree. I did that because there was some supervised research I wanted to do while I was there. But there was this big push while I was there to make it a school where everyone gets a master's degree. And so they developed this. They call it the MOS, the Master of Operational Studies. And what do you do to get the Master of Operational Studies? They doubled the history paper length from 10 to 20 pages. And they doubled like the force management paper length from like 5 to 15. Wow, real scholarship there. And you get a worthless master's degree. And what was the reason? The reason was, well, we want people to want to come here because they'll get a master's degree because we're trying to look like universities. And that's not the purpose of these primary military educational institutions. The purpose of these is to turn out officers who are better prepared to lead America's formations. Now, I am a big proponent of education. I have 3 master's degrees. I hold a PhD. Chase Spears is not against school. He's not against education. I believe he wants smart men fighting your wars. You want your generals to be well-read. You want your majors and captains to be well-read men. Go to college. I'm all about it. But that's not the purpose of the War College. The purpose of the War College is to make you an even more efficient fighter. And even at the Army War College, they've gotten away from that. So much of it is basically globalist theory. They've hired in a lot of outside civilian educators who come from the Ivy Leagues, who are bringing in the same critical theory laden worldviews that you find at these other schools. So getting rid of this fellowship at Harvard is absolutely great. It's a critical first step. There need to be about 50 follow-on steps just like it.
Well, that's really helpful. I guess we'll table the Oklahoma discussion. I probably shouldn't have thrown that one at you as a surprise, but we'll give that some time, and we'll let that one develop. But that's a great, really helpful insight into the way what Secretary Hegseth was actually speaking to. It seems to me that Harvard is really trading on an intellectual capital that the institution has built up over the last 350 years, but it doesn't merit that prestige any longer. I recently read James Hankins' essay in Compact Magazine about why he left Harvard after 40-something years to take a position at the new Hamilton School at the University of Florida. And in there, he really describes a lot of systemic level changes that mean Harvard as a whole institution is just not this shining beacon of academic excellence that it once was. it still holds the position of America's flagship university. It is the one that other universities copy. But the biggest one Hankins talked about is what used to be the standard for tenure. They apparently used to have a standard of you had to have 2 books published to be considered for tenure at Harvard University. And your second book had to be a discipline defining book. But in order to satisfy feminist requirements for hiring, they relaxed that standard and allowed for articles and dissertations and even projects to count in tenure application. And that over the last 20 years has just weakened the Harvard professorate in demonstrable ways that Hankins narrates. So it makes perfect sense to me that there would be some obvious pieces that would then show up in the way that officers are being educated for their time at Harvard in a way that Secretary Hegseth could say, like, this does not meet the goals that we're trying to achieve, which hopefully this will mean that Harvard realizes it actually needs to produce quality outcomes if it's going to receive any kind of federal dollars to educate military officers.
Well, and one thing that I hope Secretary Hegseth realizes, and I'm saying this out loud in case he doesn't recognize it, and I hope someone will get this to him, is the Department of War has the opportunity right now to reshape all of American higher ed. And why do I say that? Because the Department of War, again, has relationships and contracts and puts money into a sizable, and I mean a sizable, a majority percentage of the American Academy today for officer education, whether it be through ROTC pipelines, whether it be through the War College fellowships, whether it be through PhD fellowships that they send officers to. Like in the Army, we have the ASP3 program where they choose several officers a year to go do fully funded PhDs for 5 years. The military Department of War is a deep funding mechanism, separate completely from the VA bill, Montgomery GI Bill, separate from the student loan program. The Department of War is a sizable funder of American higher education today. If the Department of War said to every university that it has a relationship with, you are 90 days from now going to have to prove that you are not pushing these anti-American ideals in any of your programs, and it doesn't even have to be a program that the military officers go through, but you as a school cannot maintain a contractual relationship with the Department of War and keep taking our money in it and educating our officers if any single program that you run is pushing these anti-American ideals. No more gender studies programs, no more queer science programs, no more. I understand we're going to read Marx because we want to be well-rounded scholars and understand the canon of Western literature. But there's a difference between being familiar with these theories and pushing them as a worldview. And people say, well, where's the difference? You can tell, right? It's like the Supreme Court decision decades ago about how do you find pornography? You can tell, right? I think it was Justice Potter said, like, you can tell, you can't define it in words, but you can tell. Pete Hegseth has the opportunity right now, if he would send that message that he just sent to Harvard to every single university that the Department of War has a financial relationship with, and say, you're on notice. 90 days from now, we are sending a Tiger team out, and they will evaluate the school. And if you are continuing to push this anti-American rhetoric in any program, we're done. He has the chance right now to reshape the entirety of the American Academy, and by golly, I hope he takes it.
Well, it'd be quite interesting, because that would be there are similar pushes in some states, not all states by any means, to mandate by legislative fiat whether or not academics can include different subject matters. In some cases, this has already provoked some really interesting discussions. In the state of Florida, I've got friends who are involved in reviewing syllabi and then approving gen ed courses. And the state of Florida said there can be no critical theory topics, and they listed some specific topics taught in gen ed courses. They didn't ban it outright, in the state of Texas, there was a similar bill that recently got a lot of attention because there was one professor who included readings in a philosophy course from Plato's Symposium that is about sex and gender. And the philosophy professor was told he cannot have Plato on his reading list. And it made me sit back a little bit and think about this, because I'm tempted to say you could have those kind of top-down approaches and just kind of get things back to normal. I'm not sure you could have that kind of systemic approach will work. I think we're actually looking at a multi-generational replacement of activists who are currently professors. We need a whole new crop of conservative scholars who actually bring the right attitude to their courses. And that's not something that can be done by legislative fiat. But I think what you're describing is something, maybe a third option, where you've got financial pressure. And that financial pressure is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and you have to. I make no bones about this. Is not something that's very easily done by just write a policy and the problem goes away. I mean, we've seen at the Pentagon right now, many policies have been rewritten. And that's great, right? And the culture hasn't changed. It's going to require a seismic culture shift, but there are some very practical things that can be done immediately. And then there's some things that are going to take a little bit longer. I mean, if you walk into a particular department and all the ladies there have purple hair and nose rings, it's a pretty good indicator, right? So yeah, but the power of the purse is a powerful thing, right? That's why the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. That's why control of the military is split between the executive and the legislative branches, right? President, commander in chief, Congress funding authority, because the power of the purse is a powerful thing. And if you tell these schools, look, you can keep doing this all you want, but not with our money, great, right? Same. And red state governors should be doing the same thing. Red state legislature should be doing the same thing. It drives me crazy. My PhD is from Kansas State University, and let me be very clear, they treated me wonderfully there, right? But it was very clear I was in the minority. I think they told me I was not the only one, but I'm pretty sure I was the only guy like me in the program. And I openly joked with my faculty about, I know I'm your diversity hire for the program. I openly joked to them about it, and they're like, well, not really. I'm like, really? Yeah. So, I mean, they got me through. I faced no viewpoint discrimination, right? But I was swimming in a cesspool of critical theories. I was just surrounded by it, and it served me because I understand this stuff well, and understanding it is required to rebut it. But it drives me crazy that we have a Republican supermajority here in the state of Kansas, both the House and Senate. And I talked to my legislators about the state of the land grant institutions here. And they're like, well, but the trustees. And I'm like, well, but the people who fund it.
There definitely are actions that can be taken. I've read most about this from Mark Bauerlein. He's gotten several pieces out with First Things, making similar arguments about red state governors and red state legislators, looking to Florida as a model, and particularly what they've done with New College, Florida. Chase, as we're starting to kind of wrap up, I want to go back to your essay and see if we can tie a couple of threads together. So 3 things. We talked a little bit about what it means to be conservative. We've talked a little bit about Pete Hegseth, and we've talked a little bit about the way culture change is really slow and complicated. I want to see if we can tie those things together in this question. Has Pete Hegseth made meaningful shifts in helping to form a conservative military over this past year?
The answer is yes and no. Hegseth has done remarkable things, and he is a guy in constant knife fights. And I talk to people in the inner ring pretty frequently, and they're surrounded. We have a lot of good folks in the building right now, but they're surrounded. The military, even pre-Biden, pre-Obama, you look back to 13 days, and there was this open secret about the military is trying to shape the direction that the president is going, because they come up with these options that are deliberately designed to try to steer the chief executive towards a course of action that they want to go down. So this is well documented in historical literature. It's nothing new. The Department of War now, the Department of Defense, and the previous few decades, and the War Department before that, it's the largest agency in the world. And there's a tremendous amount of institutional inertia behind it. And it has a way that it wants to go. I mean, it is institutionalism on steroids. And so he has done a lot of good things in terms of shifting policy. I mean, we're no longer celebrating deviant lifestyles. Pride Month is gone. He's instituted the no walking on eggshells policy to try to de-weaponize some of the grievance systems. He's doing a lot in terms of trying to cut red tape for forced innovation. And so there's several, we had the Harvard thing, right? There are several really good things that he has done. Where I think Pete has missed the mark is failing to realize that personnel is policy. Even before he was nominated, when we weren't sure who the next president was going to be, I was saying openly to people, if Trump wins, whoever he nominates to be the new Secretary of Defense needs to have a division worth of people, and a division is roughly 10,000, needs to have a division worth of people ready to come in with him within the first month and spread them to the four winds across the world, to all the military commands, fully empowered, fully deputized to enact this agenda with authority to fire commanders if need be, if they're not on board, because we have commanders who were brought up under the previous regimes and they are not ideologically aligned to the Constitution. Now, there are a lot of good people still remaining in the military, but there are enough bad actors that basically look at the current 4 years as a passing speed bump, that as soon as it's gone, they'll get back to how they think things should be. And my concerns with Secretary Hegseth are that because he hasn't brought in a big enough team and he hasn't addressed the culture, because he'll sign a memorandum, he'll do this really cool spin around a chair video, like, I just signed the memo, it's cool, it's done, it's fixed. And it's like he thinks because the memo was signed, it's fixed. The policy may have been changed, but the culture has not been changed, because the people you expect to enact the policy are the same people that enacted the opposing policy enthusiastically. So do you think they suddenly came to Jesus overnight? Doubtful, right? And the spoiler alert is the overwhelming majority of them did not. And so that my concern is, God forbid, the Democrats go to the White House in the next term and they bring in, someone even worse than Lloyd Austin, is that every single thing that Secretary Hegseth is doing right now can be undone with a signature. It's like executive orders. It can be undone with a signature like that. That's my concern, that the harder cultural work has not been done. And the thing that I hear from people I talk to on the inside regularly is, Chase, we're just so surrounded. We're just so surrounded. And my answer is, get rid of them. What are Biden holdovers doing in senior executive level offices? What are they doing there? Why? It's insanity. When I was a company commander, I had an executive officer who worked against me. I mean, I inherited a good company. I had a good predecessor. I was really fortunate in that regard. But of course, I wanted to make it even better. And I worked really hard to make it even better, because I wanted to hand it off to my predecessor at a higher level so he could take it to the next level. That's what I always wanted to do in every job I had. And I had an executive officer working against me. And I tried to teach her, and I tried to coach her, and I tried to train her. And finally, one day I came to realize she doesn't care, and she's against what I'm trying to do. Well, am I going to let this poison stay, or am I going to remove it? I did better with that seat empty for several months than having someone fighting me. And so there's a lot of toxicity that still needs to be purged from the Pentagon, and they're afraid to, because, well, who's going to do that job? Hey, would you rather have that seat empty or someone fighting you in it? And I argue the seat's better empty.
I think it's really interesting, because to go back to that line, personnel is policy. I was looking at, I've got a project of late that's had me looking through some of the National Endowment for Humanity grant requirements, and the Department of Education, the top 5 spots, I believe, right underneath Secretary McMahon, are currently vacant. So the Department of Education has been a particular focus of the Trump administration. Trump can't get rid of the Department of Ed without congressional approval. And he's very unlikely to get that. The teachers union is pretty powerful, and teachers everywhere like the Department of Ed for some reason I don't understand. And parents think that the Department of Ed actually does something and that we should keep it, even though it's led to it correlates directly with the tanking of American scores in reading and math. I say all that to say that at the very least, the changes that can be made are to move things around and to shrink the size of the Department of Education staff. Those have both been made, but I think, and it has led to a change in the culture within the Department of Education. What you're describing sounds like similar things still need to happen within the Pentagon. And I think it's a really good word of caution to actual conservatives. And I want to go back to our earlier distinction. I don't mean MAGA, I don't mean Republicans, but I mean actual conservatives who are looking at Trump as a lame duck president who's got 3 more years, and he's a president who always has surprises up his sleeve. I had no idea he was going to go extradite Maduro from Venezuela. I was like, what is happening right now? But he is going to step off the stage in 3 years. And there are plenty of people. I saw a rumor today. I don't know if it's true, but at least a rumor of Kamala Harris and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez teaming up to run together in 2028. Part of me was like, oh, that'd be great. We could whoop them in a hot second. But
that's a dream team for us.
Maybe. But it does at least just remind me to like, okay, yeah, if politics is playing for keeps. And it's still true, like it is every presidential election, that the presidential election is the most important one of our lifetimes. That's been true for everyone in my lifetime, and I'm sure it will be again in 2028. But it's for these very reasons that the personnel as policy is really the heart of it. And you have a lot of people who are still entrenched in the Pentagon bureaucracy and the administrative state, in the career bureaucracy within the United States federal government. Chase, last question from me is, where do you see the U.S. military going in the next 3 years? We've got 3 years where we've got some attempt at a conservative leadership that's trying to make good changes. Just to quickly rattle off a few things of note that from 2025, we successfully bombed the Iranian nuclear facilities. We extradited Maduro from his house in Caracas, and have sunk several drug boats offshore by way of nuclear missile, which is officially my favorite way of dealing with people deciding to bring tons of narcotics into America. I mean, I don't have any sympathy for drug runners. Like, I'm not entirely sure about the constitutionality of us just like targeting a boat and dropping a missile on it. But that's bringing in a product that the American people want and is terrible for them. So it's all the better, I think, to keep that out. All that being said, where do you see the U.S. military going in the next 3 years?
Well, the biggest thing that I'm hoping for is that the Department of War will finally make an honest effort towards COVID amends. Over 8,000 people were kicked out from 2020 to 2022 over that unlawful policy. And we have, even though Secretary Hegseth followed Trump's executive order, Trump did an executive order just a couple of days after coming back into office and said, we're going to bring everyone back in. We're going to reinstate them, give them full back pay, make them whole. And as of today, only 104 people have been brought back in. Now, a lot of them don't want to come back in. And what's the ratio of people who want to versus don't want to? I don't know. There's been no survey data done on it. And I have been very, 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 very critical of the Department of War, and in particular against Secretary Tata, who is the Undersecretary of War for Personnel and Readiness. This is his bailiwick. And we've seen in the last week, it seems like there's finally been some motivation at his office to start moving on this and stop just giving us BS talking points. And I've called them out when they've done that before. And so I've seen some action in just the last week that gives me renewed optimism that maybe they will get that done. The second thing in terms of operations, I tell you, I am this close to being an isolationist. I think the military has been so misused in my lifetime for foreign adventures that in no way make any kind of legitimate connection to U.S. national security policy or interest. But if we don't do something to help topple the Iranian regime while it's up there at the top of the limb, swinging the breeze, we will have missed a historic opportunity to truly make the world a safer place. Now, I'm not talking about boots on ground, but the Iranian people are rising up. They're done, and they're being slaughtered. They're being slaughtered en masse. And if we don't take this opportunity to assist them in some way, I think history will look back and say we missed what we should have done. For all the money and time and treasure we wasted in Iraq and Afghanistan, this is something where a few well-placed missiles and a few, little bit of intelligence assistance could go a long way towards stabilizing the world, because Iran has been one of the most destabilizing forces in the entirety of my lifetime. And nearly every one of my colleagues who came home in body bags during my career, there's an Iranian fingerprint on it somewhere. So I really do hope the president is planning on doing something militarily. And I realize that it's extraordinarily complicated, and I'm not naive about it. I have a son in the National Guard. I do not want open world war, but we got to do something. And so I hope we do that. And really the next thing I'm hoping that we'll see in the next 3 years is that there'll be hard moves to actually anchor these changes in the culture. And that's going to require accountability. There are commanders who need to be court-martialed. There are certain officers who need to be invited to retire and told, thank you. We've looked at what you did. You pushed unlawful policies. You were warned about unlawful policies. It's time for you to retire. And there's some you can continue to serve, but you're going to be taken off any future promotion list or command list. There needs to be a form of scaled accountability. And up until now, there has been a complete rejection of that idea from the Pentagon, because they act like people like me just want everyone's head on a pike. And that's not the case. There's always been scaled accountability in the military. There's always been this idea of you will be held accountable if you follow unlawful orders. And there were a lot of commanders who enthusiastically followed unlawful orders. And we need to have some form of accountability, some form of recognition of that. And there needs to be some form of institutional amends, because without that, you're never really truly going to make the military trustworthy again. And so we need to see an accountability movement in these next 3 years, because if not, we're going to have a military that just continues to perpetuate what's been done before. And when I saw the way it just went hook, line, and sinker for COVID. It went hook, line, and sinker for transgenderism. If it falls into the wrong hands again, it would not be a grand leap to at some point go hook, line, and sinker for turning arms against constitutionally minded Americans, because that was already being sewed into military trainings while I was in. We've got to eradicate that, and that requires a forceful accountability mechanism.
Well, I think we've all seen the extremity with which mainstream media and leftist and many centrist folks talk about January 6th as if it were a true insurrection. I don't think it at all qualifies as an insurrection. I think but it was certainly billed as such. And then the events in Minneapolis over the last, say, 2 months, I think I don't really expect them to, but it should drill home to everyone involved in public communication. It matters a lot about how you speak about other people. And it matters a lot what you, from a position of power, encourage other people to do. So I think Mayor Jacob Fry and Governor Tim Walz both bear a substantial amount of responsibility for publicly encouraging the citizens of Minneapolis to oppose duly authorized federal agents of ICE. So that kind of rhetoric becomes, I think, very powerful and is strong grounds for the kind of accountability that you're describing. Last thing I want to say to your middle point there about Iran. I heard a talk last summer by Pastor Doug Wilson at the ACCS conference, where he made the somewhat startling claim that we haven't really left the Middle Ages, and that the Middle Ages are still very present with us. And to understand our time today, we really need to really understand the Central and High Middle Ages. And one of the biggest tension points that you reminded me of in there is that in the Middle Ages, you had an overt Christendom and an overt Islamic empire. And there was obvious war in the Crusades of Christendom versus the Islamic empires of the day. And I don't know that I want to endorse crusade. I'm very Protestant. We're not nearly organized enough to do any kind of effective crusading. But it does seem to me that in as much as America, and particularly the American regime, the American civilization, whatever you want to call it, is an heir to the West, we do inherit the Western Christian opposition to organized Islamic extremism. There was always able to be peace between moderate and non-observant Muslims and the Christian West. Charlemagne and Harun al-Rashid kind of famously exchanged presents. Harun sent Charlemagne an elephant. And Harun al-Rashid was not a terribly observant Muslim. He was really interested in cultivating scholarship and economic opportunity. That's the kind of Islam that I think America we can deal with people who want to trade and who operate under rule of law. We cannot deal with people who really do take seriously the Quran's commands to kill the infidel and who really do believe that Allah is pleased by the establishment of a global Islamic state, which is precisely what the Iranian regime does in fact hold. It's why multiple presidents and ayatollahs have referred to America as the Great Satan. They really do mean that. And now I want to distinguish between the Iranian government and the current regime and the Iranian people. One of my colleagues is Iranian. I mean, his contention is that the vast majority of people who live in Iran do not care about Islam. Now, it's not true to say they're all Christian. They're generally kind of irreligious, culturally Muslim people who really just want to live their lives and kind of raise their families and live in Iran and have a country. They don't really have an active desire to be part of this Islamic theocracy. And I think we've seen that as evidenced in the recent movements to overthrow their current regime. And then the Islamic government ordering the slaughter of 12,000 protesters that we know of. It's just heartbreaking. So I think you're right to call for that as a potential option, though I'm with you on not wanting any boots on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I just that was my career. I was in the forever war, and I believe that I'm very much a Christian just war traditionalist. That if we're going to commit to war, it has to be for the right cause, and we have to be willing to actually commit the resources to get it done. I think the Iranian people will get it done if we just give them a little help. The tree is already swaying. The saw is at its base. They just need someone to help tie a rope around the top of it and give some tugs, and I think we could do that. But what you got out there is the reality. Another thing that Wilson says is it's Christ or chaos, and there we have to recognize that this nation will serve something. And people try to say, "Oh, we want a secular state, we want an irreligious state." There's no such thing as an irreligious state. The state will follow one thing, and it will love one thing, or it will follow another thing and it will love another thing. And we're already seeing that here in the United States, where you can barge into a church and it's applauded by the cultural elites. But you do that to a mosque, you and I both know the fires that would be out in the streets. And so, I mean, which one is protected? We have to turn that around if we're going to maintain a country, because Islam plays for keeps. Those who serve darkness, whether it be Islam or whether it be secular humanism, they play for keeps. And that goes into some of the writing that I'm starting to do now. That's not necessarily endearing me to all the elders at my church. Is Christians have to man up at this point in time. They have to recognize what time of day it is. It's one thing to be called by Christ to suffer. It's another thing to fetishize and go out and seek it. And we're not called to do that. We are given agency. We're given tools of political power. And if we don't use them, I think we'll account for them, just like the parable of the talent says.
Well, Chase, I'll look forward to seeing those essays as they come out. If people want to read your writing, where's the best place online for them to read your stuff?
No, thanks for asking, Josh. The best way to keep up with my writing is at chasespears.com. Just about everything that I publish, I put in a publication link there. I also, every time I publish something new, I post a link to it in my Substack. So whether it's Substack, LinkedIn, YouTube, X, I'm at Dr. Chase Spears at all of those. So at Dr. Chase Spears at pretty much all the major socials. and chasespears.com. So I love it when people look at my stuff and reach out. I enjoy the conversation, and I'm always honored whenever someone gives of their time to look at something that's been bouncing around my head.
Excellent. Well, we'll put links to those in the show description. Chase, it's always great to talk with you. You are a man of strong convictions, and I appreciate your willingness to voice those clearly. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me again, Josh. I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm really excited about getting to connect to Omaha here soon.
I know. Ciceronian is going to be wonderful. If anybody, we've got a little bit of a live stream audience. By my count, we got 26, 27 people. There's our 6-7 joke for the day. If any adults out there still care about what the kids are saying these days. But anybody who wants to come to the best Christian academic conference in America today, there are still tickets available. It's happening at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, March 12 through 14. I will actually be chairing a plenary session. We got the good luck of the draw. So I'll be leading a panel on C.S. Lewis's Ransom trilogy as response to modernism. So if you want to come out, meet Chase, meet me, meet several other people who've been on my show. A lot of my friends are going to be at Ciceronian. So come on out and join us. So Chase, it'll be great to see you in person.
Looking forward to it, buddy. It's always a good time.
You've been listening to another episode of The Optimistic Curmudgeon. If you enjoyed this episode, like it and share it with your network. Help others think great ideas. You can find the show on all the platforms, but primarily on X as @TheOptimisticC3, on Facebook and LinkedIn under my name, Josh Herring, and on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to get the next conversation.